ocean's whisper calls my name. Depth and longing in my soul, seeking more than just this game. Waves crash softly at my feet, echoes in my heart so deep. Eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Echoes in my heart so deep, eyes on horizon far and true, longing for a love so steep. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Shells and sand beneath my toes, tides reveal what ebb and flows. In the quiet still I hear whispered longings crystal clear. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore. Fire, depth of love beyond all dreams, in the vastness it redeems. Deep calls to deep inside of me, where the sky meets endless sea. Heartbeats blend with ocean's roar, seeking depth I can't ignore.
Alrighty. Hey, everybody. It has been a while. Yes, I still haven't fixed the beep, Roddy. I'm sorry. It has been a little while. I keep forgetting. So it's been a little while. There's been a whole bunch of crazy stuff going on. Like, I just can't even. So, first of all, I'm going to, hang on. Okay. We're having massive ADHD brain issues today, so this should be interesting. So, first of all, Adam, we are finally wrapping up this Torah thing. It has been so much fun, and I don't know why my timer for the live thing just reset. That was weird. I don't know. Apparently, we're having technical difficulties, and I didn't know it. I don't know. Anyway, so Adam is back. We are wrapping up the Torah series. This has been a lot of fun, and this episode has been a while coming. And I'm really excited about this one because we're going to get in trouble. So I say that every time, and so far,
buddy.
This one, we're going to push it. Definitely going to push it. But Adam, for those who are don't know who you are or haven't seen the rest of this series, just kind of like introduce yourself. Where can people find you, and how is your Saturday going?
Well, first and foremost, my Saturday is going great. I was able to watch some morning soccer, and I guess I'm going to transition to football if I do. I'm not sure. I may just read the rest of the day. But the books I want to read before the semester starts on Tuesday. If you guys don't know me, I am Linguisamo. Adam is, you can call me Adam because I know for some reason my name is weird. It's Latin. So I run a small YouTube channel where I discuss all things Old Testament. Namely, it's usually history and archaeology. We dabble a little bit in the theology aspects of the Old Testament, or and sometimes we discuss language as far as Hebrew and Greek are concerned and Aramaic. So that's what I do. Academically, I am getting my second master's degree in the Old Testament at Biola University. And I have one master's degree already from Liberty University in biblical studies. So with the second degree, it's more foundational, it's more degree specific. And I hope to continue with a PhD after that. I'm still unsure of what I want to do. I want to do Old Testament text criticism, and then I had someone in the department there at Biola go, "Why?" Uh, because uh, why do you want to do that? It's he goes, "You know how meticulous that is? Why not do something, Old Testament related, but not Old Testament text criticism?" So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I am. I'm gonna try and get back this semester making content. I know I've been kind of those who know me, I think there are a couple of them who follow me on the social media accounts and my YouTube channel. They know about what happened the past year. So you'll see, that's why you see me in different backgrounds. I think through this series, Amber, I've been in two different,
Right.
like when we started, this wasn't the room I was in. So, yeah, things are looking up. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
All right. Yeah. And Adam and I actually got connected through our mutual friend Nick Quint. And
Yep.
uh, that's so I keep trying to drag him on here, but he keeps whining about not knowing enough about the Old Testament. So he's the one who's missing
Says he's
out,
doing a PhD, but
No, it's just because he's a New Testament nerd, and they're just not as cool as the Old Testament nerds are. That's
that's true. That's
that's
true.
what that really is. And yes, that was directly a dig. I'm feeling a little ornery today, so that's going to add to us getting in a little bit of trouble today, I think. But first of all, I need to, and somebody, probably Roddy, clip this out because I owe Will Hess over at the Church Split an apology. I called him out for something and I was incorrect. So
Ooh,
I have apologies, Will.
what was
And
that?
uh, well, there's this long running uh, thing about back and forth, like who's coming on whose channels and collabs and
Oh,
things like that. And so I called him out for constantly saying things like we need to platform more women scholars and women theologians and not having one on his channel himself, but he actually had Lydia McGrew on for one episode. So
oh,
I had to I had to walk that back and be like, yep, sorry. I apologize to Lydia McGrew. I didn't I did not apologize to Will for that. So there's Will's apology. Uh but that's okay. He doesn't watch my content anyway, so he'll never see it. So that's too bad for him. Anyway, and Roddy just said Roddy will flip it and send it to him. Anyway, so like I said, I'm a little bit a little bit of an on move this morning. This morning, so this
all good.
is even more fun. So yeah,
All
actually,
good.
I started Monday,
Hmm.
and I am having to scramble to completely restructure my thesis proposal, which is due on the 13th. So I have to rewrite the entire thing because biblical studies doesn't really like you to write a pure theological thesis. So I have to go back Like, no, you have to have a text to start from. Like, but okay.
Oh yeah.
Yes. So I have to go back and restructure the entire thing. But it's going to be fun because that is also going to be done in a way that I think is going to make a few people cranky. So, but that's going to be fun to try to. We'll talk about. I'll tell you all about that later because that's most people aren't going to get that with some of the technicalities of some of this stuff. And then I'm hoping after that this thesis will, and the process. And I'd like to go to Ridley and get my PhD and be focusing on intertextuality and canonical narrative. Actually, narrative. I'm the whole. I don't want to get into the canon debate because
No, it's all
that's
good.
a mess. We don't want to. We just. I know. I'm going to do a whole video on that too at some point. It's on my list. My very very long
You and
list of
Mike are awesome.
episodes to do. So anyway, they're not here to listen to all of this chit chat and stuff about Will and my thesis. So let's jump into what we are here to talk about. And we are getting into, where's my outline? Over here. Torah. And
Yes.
two questions. One, is Jesus in Torah? And is Jesus Torah? Are the two questions that I put on the thumbnail because that is what we're going to talk about. And so I put on the description, I think, or in the chat, I don't remember. But yeah, there's going to be some things I think in here that people are going to disagree with, and taking, I think, some minority takes. But I think, as we were talking about before we started, that we think we can defend these ideas, and so we're going to throw them out there anyway. So. But first of all, Adam, let's go back. And if you would be so kind, sir, we have gone through in this series, talked about all of the ways that the word Torah is used. So if you can just kind of, let's go back and okay, Torah, what does that word mean? And what are the ways that it gets used? So we can clarify how we're going to talk about Jesus being in Torah in the first place by figuring out Torah.
Yeah. So Torah simply just means instructions. I'm sure we've all watched, hopefully we've all watched Pirates of the Caribbean when he says they're more guidelines, if you will. But essentially, Torah are just instructions for right living, for holy living, especially in light of God, of who he is and what he does, and what he has done and what he will do. So, more or less, that sums up what Torah is. If we were to delve more deeply into that word, we could probably see some sort of outline of a figure, perhaps the second person of the Trinity, if you will, in all his glory. But as far as the Old Testament is concerned, we get to see it as Torah. We see Torah as a foreshadow of the one to come. So that is essentially what Torah is and what it's about. So,
and I think too, people kind of get confused because Torah can refer to the first 5 books of the canon.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. That is referred to as Torah. And then you've got the instructions that come from the Mosaic Covenant, which that is also called Torah. So but that word gets translated. We talked about a whole episode talking about how that gets translated in the New Testament as law, and that modern understanding of the word law and how that looks is kind of skewed what our starting premise of Torah is. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to take the courtroom scene, and we're going to take the judge and the rules of everything is a thou shalt not, and throw that right out the window from the get-go. Because as we talked about in a couple of episodes, the only thou shalt and thou shalt nots are in the 10 Commandments, and the rest of it is all if-then scenarios and situations. And usually, because I had some pushback on this, actually, Adam, that somebody was disagreeing with me about that, and no, these are the rules. I said, well, so this is how I try to push back and explain that a little bit more. They're if-then scenarios that give you the worst case scenario resolution to this situation, but the priests and the religious leaders have a whole lot of range to work with people where they are without going to the extreme every single time, which is why you don't see a whole lot of those extremes implemented, because they are the furthest extreme. But there is a lot of room built into Torah to meet people where they were, and to give them the care they need to bring them back in to being in the community without the drastics of the extremes that we're seeing. So that's really, I think, where people get a little confused. Is it's not, if you do this, then your only option is this. No, that's the furthest extreme we're going to go. The first of the things God will allow, and the harshest correction that could be given. But there's a whole lot of room for grace for meeting people where they are. So we're going to throw out all of that other. This is the absolute only way it can be, because I just don't think that you can get past the word Hesed and Yahweh and make that argument very
Make it, yeah,
convincingly for me, at
yeah.
least, because you just see that play out over and over. I mean, that's the entire prophetic canon, the books of the prophets, is just come back. Then on all of this, the judgment, the wrath, all of this stuff will instantly be stopped. Like it's so
Hmm. That's for
enforcing
sure.
that it
Yeah.
has to be the maximum doesn't hold up, which is one of the things I love about narrative studies, because when you pull these things out of context and make these hard stances on things like this, when you put it back into the grander narrative, then some of them start to fall apart. So then you get
Mhm.
into these things where, as a good friend of mine says, I'm going to put this back up here because I love this. It's one of my new backgrounds, but this is fractal patterns, and these things are going to hold all the way up and all the way down. So in the big narrative and in the smaller narrative of the story, it has to be true
Mhm.
all the way up and all the way down. So, which is why if then gives room for grace, because we see God offering it over and over and over and over. And that's his default grace, mercy, love relationship, because that is
It
Hesed.
is.
Is God is Hesed, and he is very
Yeah.
adamant about that. So if we're going to start talking about Jesus in Torah, let's start with the first 5 books, because this is where we can really have some fun with some of this. So obviously we start with Genesis because it's the first one. And you and I are
Impossible.
both have a lot of fun with Genesis. And I love the book of Genesis. And it is one of those things that I almost became a prophet or a Torah scholar because of the book of Genesis.
Hmm.
And you could just live, I think I could just live in Genesis 1 forever and be completely and totally happy, because there's so much in Genesis 1, and just the structure and the complexity and the beauty, and there's the poetry. It's so much good stuff in
There
there.
is a ton to unravel in Genesis 1 alone.
Yes. Yes. But we see in the first three chapters in Genesis, it kind of sets up the stage and the story for us. And that allows us to kind of see where we're going. And, it's kind of like the coming attractions reel of how we got to where
Mhm.
we're at. So hey, here's this sets this up. We got the bigger narrative of creation in 1, and you got the part that focuses on the human part of the story in Genesis 2, and then 3 is
Mhm.
kind of how things go off the rails, and we
Unravel,
need
or yeah.
right, and we
Yeah.
need to be redeemed and brought back. And so then we've got the rest of this, and I think that's where we see our first promise of Christ, is when the one who is coming to crush the serpent, the seed
Yep.
of Eve, is coming to crush the head of the serpent and going to restore things back to where it is. So you start off in Genesis 3, he shows up. I mean, you and I would probably both argue that he is part of the Trinitarian formula that's in Genesis 1. So we're going to see it from, basically the first sentence of Genesis.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
um, but that's an argument. I don't really want to get into that Trinitarian
No.
argument at the moment, because that gets really ugly and confusing. And
We
I'm
only
not.
want to tick people off so much. We don't want to.
That's right. Right. We don't want to start a fight about how to define the Trinity, because there's just that's a confusing conversation that usually has to end in theolegumena at some point anyway. So for those of you who are familiar with the term theolegumena, that's a term that means that there are certain things that are humanly impossible to know. So there's certain things that are we just as fallen humans, just can't know about God and his attributes and natures and all that good stuff. So at a certain point we have to go, Dea Legumina. There's certain things we don't know. So, but back to the narrative in Genesis. So first we see Jesus show up as the promise in Genesis 3, and the one who's coming to crush the head of the serpent. And there's a lot of debate about the serpent and that language there and who that is, and is it and I don't want to, I actually have a question for you, and you and I think
Yeah.
disagree a little bit on this point, which would be kind of fun to play with just a tiny bit because it matters. That I get in the old earth, young earth debates, which I just at this point roll my eyes and avoid as much as possible, because I don't think it matters that the
I certainly don't
chronological
really engage.
age, like, yeah, but that
Fair enough, Courtney.
there was also the debate about, are Adam and Eve real, and
hmm
it's going to matter a lot when we get to Matthew in the New Testament, because this,
hmm
Matthew's genealogy goes all the way back to Adam. And I think, like, because I saw you made a short about
Did.
this,
Yeah.
making the case that it's metaphorical or allegorical, not necessarily like,
So
yeah,
I made a short, what was that, a month ago now?
something like that, yeah.
So it was a short, I made a short about is Adam and Eve myth or not myth? And
Mm-hmm.
the crux of the argument was that it could be um some people will interpret it as that they didn't create it, that it doesn't play off every man because every man is a medieval poem, but it seems to, I'm trying to word this correctly. It seems to sort of follow that same script of every man, and that we are Adam and Eve, and that we have fallen ourselves, we've sinned ourselves. So that's what I was taking it as, or it could be Israel. I don't really think it's Israel. I just think it's everyone. Like we can all find some sort of truth about ourselves in Adam and Eve, and that we have sinned. And then if you look at the New Testament, Matthew, I forget the verse now, but if you look at Matthew, you can see that that they may have just when Jesus says, "And have you not heard in the beginning they have created the male and female," referencing Adam and Eve,
Mm-hmm.
and we sort of do that with fictional literature as well, with Romeo and Juliet, for example. We'll say, well, do you remember when Romeo? I know no one actually says. I don't know how many people have read Romeo and Juliet, but indulge me here. We will say things like, well, have you read this book? And you remember what this fictional character said in this fictional book? Whether I don't know. I used Romeo and Juliet because it was off the top of my head. So, but you brought up an interesting point. It could be both. It could be us. We find some sort of truth about ourselves in Adam and Eve, and that we have sinned as well, and we miss the mark as well, to use the Greek word. Uh, so that's what I was saying. And both, I think it could be both as well. Oh, I lost my right earpiece here. Let me get. So I think it could be both as well. I don't think I actually made that clear though, so I'm gonna make that clear now.
Right, because
So
that was my only pushback. I had no problem with what you said, but and this came out of a couple of things. One, I said something similar, and Dr. Ray Lubeck definitely had some strong words for me about what I had just said about that whole thing. And in his biblical interpretation class, I had to write 12 papers on the book of Jonah. We spent like 9 weeks or something crazy, like 12 weeks in Jonah. It took me a year to be able to look at the book of Jonah again, because I was so immersed. But here's one of the things that I learned about that, because I got, and one day I got asked to speak into, somebody asked me, there's a debate about was Jonah real or not. And I'm like, okay, this is the same argument with Adam and Eve, I think. I think because in the narrative and the story that the Bible is telling, it doesn't matter if they're real or not, if they're real or not. It doesn't, and some people are going to get mad at me, like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't, the entirety of Christendom is going to collapse if Adam and Eve are just figures in a story.
Yeah.
that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in the narrative, it doesn't matter if they're real or not. Now, do I think that they were real, and do I think Jonah was real? Yes. But again,
Mhm.
them being real or not doesn't affect the truth of the narrative. So I think Adam and Eve are representing a lot of things. I think this is one of those things, is why I could spend forever in Genesis 1, that 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 the Bible is so beautifully and complexly simply written that the
Yeah.
story is accessible and easy, but within that story there are wrapped so many layers that it takes a lifetime to just start to untangle. And the more you untangle it, the more beauty you find, and the more connections that you find, in which you have to go back again and go back and untangle it all over again. Because as you get into the layers and get further and further in, the patterns just pop out, and it just so. I don't think, I think it's one of those porque no los dos things. Like, why not? They can be real and they can be figures in the myth at the same time. Like, both can be true. So we are going to, yes. So we're going to say around here, porque no los dos, because I don't think it creates a problem for this both to
I
be,
don't think so.
I can make up a story about Abraham Lincoln. It doesn't matter if he's real or not. He
Yeah.
is, but like, it's the same thing. And we do the same thing with our own versions of history and our own versions of whatever it is we're doing. So I think Adam froze on us there for a second. So I'll just keep talking till he gets back. So yeah, so in the first 5 books, that sets us up for we lost Adam. So hopefully he'll be back. The first 5 books sets us up for the pattern that we see Christ in, and that we see who we are expecting that's going to come and fix the problem that people created in Genesis 3. So, and you really start to see it is the story of Noah. And it's really kind of interesting where you see.
See if that.
All right, there we go. Now he's back.
Okay.
He just kind of popped out. So I was just starting to lay out the case that that this is the first 5 books, especially Genesis, are setting up the pattern for the coming Messiah. So you start with Noah, because there's that really interesting part in the story of Noah where, when before the flood, and when Noah is born, his father's like, "Is this the one we're waiting for?" And you're like,
Mhm.
if they're not waiting for someone, this question makes no sense. And sitting with that, and you're just like, okay, so we are expecting someone, the someone who's coming to fix it. They're already expecting him by Noah. So
Yeah.
that's, Christ shows up in the Noah narrative. And Noah is held up as the one who saves a whole lot of people, but he's not the one who comes to reconcile and redeem and restore us into relationship with God. And that's a lot of what the Genesis story does, especially in after chapters 12 through the end, where we see the focus on the family of Abraham. They're pulling all these people up. Is it Abraham? Nope. Is it Isaac? Nope. Is it Jacob? Nope. But they're going to be pieces of, these are all typologies that are pointing us to Christ and to who
Mhm.
is coming. Who is coming. So Christ is going to save like Noah. Christ is going to, be all inclusive, like the promises to Abraham. So there's all of these pieces. And this is really interesting too, Adam. I just was thinking about this because Hebrew does this really weird thing where it will pull together a collection of things and then pull one thing up as the above the group. So it's like, here's
Yeah.
the group of things, and it'll pull it up, but this is the example of the thing we're looking at. So it will pull
Mhm.
together similar, but highlight one. And I think that's a lot of what's going on with all of these figures throughout Genesis. And then we see it again with Moses, because we're expecting, in the book of Hebrews, in the hall of heroes, that's exactly what's happening. These are all typologies of things and aspects of the coming Messiah. So they're all representing Christ in some way and aspect that together give us a pretty well-rounded primer to Christology by the time we get to the Gospels. So we should be set to like, okay, here's what we got. So I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because this is so where I get a little,
Um,
little
as
confused.
far as the typologies
The
of
typologies, yeah.
okay, yeah. So I think that was a great example with Noah. But he, and I think you'll agree with this. He's not the only one.
Hmm.
He's certainly not the only one. Um, you had Abraham was another type of Christ. Jonah himself,
Hmm.
somewhat was a type of Christ. I know you don't want to revisit Jonah after writing many papers, but Jonah was the type of Christ. Actually, I love the book of Jonah.
Hmm.
Namely for one of those reasons, in that again, he's kind of like Adam and Eve. That I think one of the people here said they could be representing
Yeah.
us. And yeah,
Yeah.
exactly is what it is.
Yeah.
So Jonah is kind of this is the same thing, in that we sometimes are hostile towards God and stuff, or we've run away from God. So, but at the same time, he's a type of Christ, because he did go down to, he was
Hmm.
down in the belly, which is, a metaphor for death, for 3 days, and then he came back. So there are definitely certain typologies all littered throughout the Old Testament, not just limited to Noah and Abraham, but then you've got
Right.
Jonah is one. So
Well, Joshua is another one, because that kind of sets us up for the early
Joshua,
churches. Christus Victor, because you've got this, God is reclaiming and
Moses,
evicting. Yeah, he's like, God owns this, and he's evicting the tenants and putting in the rightful owners of the land. Like, so,
mm,
he's there's a whole lot of there's aspects of
yeah,
some,
Moses
like
being
there's
the
judges.
forerunner.
Yes, and there's a whole bunch of those, King David. So, because by the time you get done with the narrative of the Old Testament, what we're waiting for is a prophet, a priest, and a king who can do only what Yahweh can do. And that is set up by the narrative of the Old Testament, which really starts and is grounded in Genesis, because
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
setting the direction and the expectation. Because, we
And
get
he,
to Abraham, and it's, okay, you're bringing somebody, but how is this the vehicle? What's the vehicle that's going to get us there? It's going to be the family of Abraham, which is going to turn into Israel.
correct. Yeah. And it's interesting you said God, priest, and king, and each
Mhm.
role must be fulfilled. And Jesus literally fills all three of them
Yes.
in the New Testament. So,
Right. And it's really interesting too, because Torah, again, this is where Torah comes in and working with this, really highlighting the fact that Christ is there in Torah. But Torah has very specific instructions that prophets and priests and kings, those roles don't mix.
no,
There's very specific. A prophet can't be a
correct.
king, and a priest can't be a king, and king can't be a prophet, king can't be a priest. That doesn't mean kings didn't say things that were prophetic, but they weren't in the office of prophet, because that's very
Mhm.
different things in there. Because a lot of psalms are prophetic, but we're talking about specific defined roles in, as in the Torah explains them. So those three things in the mind of someone who understands Torah, by the time we get to the New Testament, those three things cannot coexist. They're impossible. But they're made possible because they can, that one can do only what Yahweh can do, which is where we
Mhm.
see the book of John lays that out so beautifully, and really goes into,
Yeah.
he is, because he does the things only God can do. And you get the 7 claims, like, I am the bread of life, I am the way, like all of those things are anchored and anchoring those claims of prophet, priest, king. And
Hmm.
it's really, really, really fun to dig into some of this stuff. But um, so I don't know if we want to hit, and I think too, Adam, I would like to stop here for just a second, because we did a whole entire episode on this one.
We did.
But going back going back
We
to
did. We can always revisit.
Leviticus. We going back to Leviticus, because people are going to be like, "How in the world is Jesus in Leviticus?" Which, that question automatically gives me a headache. But like I said, I'm a little punchy today, so I'm trying to tone it
Right.
down. But because that is setting up um, how do we, because in the story you get the end of Exodus, and you've got this beautiful tabernacle, and they go into great detail twice explaining this
Yeah.
tabernacle, because this is recreating that sacred space that Eden started for meeting with God.
Yeah.
So we got to recreate that, because sacred space is so vital in the Old
Yeah.
Testament, like the understanding of sacred space. We got to create that. And it's mobile, which is unique amongst the ancient world. The gods didn't sit in the middle of camp and go on the road trips with them. They were up on the high places and everybody went to them, and God did the backwards thing. And,
Yeah.
but so you've got this mobile sacred space of access that no other ancient Near East religion had. But now man's cut out because we've got problems, and we've got clean and unclean issues. There's some holiness problems, and how do we
Mhm.
deal with this uncleanness, not sin, corruption? So we're gonna, I have a whole series, why Leviticus matters. We'll deal with this, and we've got one coming out later this month dealing with holiness in the priesthood. So we're really going to dig into this some more. But we got a holiness problem. How do we get back in God's presence? Because you have to get to the book of Numbers, which is the two worst road trips in history. So, somehow we got to get back into the tabernacle for these terrible road trips. That's where the book of Leviticus lies. And
Mhm.
Leviticus is clean and unclean. How do we get clean to be back in clean space to meet with God? And a lot of that imagery there, the priest imagery, the sacrificial imagery, all talks about that restoring of cleanliness,
Mhm.
that is Christ is Leviticus,
Mhm.
because that's how we get back into God's presence. And Leviticus gets us to Christ to make that permanent and eternal, because
Mhm.
Leviticus is cyclical and it has to be reset annually. But
And yeah,
Christ
the Day of
says,
Atonement.
I'm establishing the eighth day. This is permanent forever.
Yeah.
And that's so, yes, Jesus is all over Leviticus. Um,
Yeah. I think that translates
and
really well into the New Testament too. I
yeah,
know we haven't got to the New Testament yet because we're
yeah.
still in Leviticus, but you mentioned the sanctuary, and that's exactly what Jesus is in the New Testament.
Hmm.
He's literally a walking sanctuary because he's going around healing everyone.
Yep.
It's just one reason why. So he's like a mobile dwelling place, with the exception that he cannot be defiled, which is but he purifies instead. Like the power just comes out of him, and he just purifies ritualistic uncleanness or impurities
Hmm.
and moral impurities. So we should see that immediate connection in the Torah and Jesus as the
Hmm.
sanctuary in both the Old and the New Testaments, specifically in the New Testament, because it was again foreshadowing a
Yep.
typology of
Which is why there's a few things at play there that I want to kind of touch into now that you've made that connection, because I think a lot, I've run into several people. I don't want to broad statement everybody, but I run into a lot of people who don't really stop to think about that in the miracles. We see Jesus touching people who in the Levitical system were unclean and would have made anyone else
Mhm.
unclean to have touched lepers and to have touched, the woman with the bleeding, and anyone who has got fluid issues that's going on, or something that made them unclean to enter the temple. Jesus could touch them and it didn't make him unclean, it made them clean, which is really, really interesting. And until I stopped to think about it, when somebody pointed out the pattern to me, it was because I wrote a paper um, a while ago about salvation in the book of Isaiah, and how you
Mhm.
can't get out of Isaiah without this idea that healing and salvation work together. You
Mhm.
have to go together. So Isaiah really brings that out more than anybody else, I think, in the Old Testament. And when you put that together with the book of Ezekiel, and it talks about the being made of the spirit, and not, the death of the carnal, being reborn in the spirit. And that takes you to Romans 5 pretty easily. And that's kind of how all of that, quote unquote, works, because, that's that process. That's why those things didn't make Christ unclean to interact with and touch and heal those people, because he was of the divine. And he was, you get into that, and I don't want to get into the two natures debate about fully human, fully divine, because he was, and we're just not going to even entertain anything different than that. But that's why that works, because he was a sacred space in and of himself, and that could cleanse it, and so he could touch the unclean without becoming unclean and healing people. And so, but that was another beautiful picture that it takes you back to being like, oh, that's, if you understand sacred space, if you understand holiness, and you understand clean and unclean, it makes a whole lot more sense. And it, I think, to me, makes it so much even more beautiful what's going on in the Gospels, when you kind of get some of this Old Testament background of what's happening there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, and then I think the last piece left there is Deuteronomy. And this is where, because I learned Torah from a Deuteronomy scholar, so that it's my favorite of the Torah books, just because it was really redefined for me. Because when I used to read Deuteronomy, and I slogged my way through it, because this is just a regurgitation of all these rules and laws, and this is really boring. And my professor, she gave everybody a dare. And she's like, you're going to read Deuteronomy, and every verse in Deuteronomy, I want you to think God is writing a love letter. And it absolutely blew my mind. Completely changed the way that I saw, and how much is built into Torah and the instructions and Leviticus, and that is God's love that is manifested in the incarnation. So, God is laying out, here is how I love you, and you're going to know that when the incarnation, because he's going to come and show you.
Yeah.
So, like, that to me absolutely blew my mind, that connection there too.
I never really thought of reading Deuteronomy as a love letter, honestly. Usually I just read it as our typical Hittite vassal treaty, sovereign vassal treaty, or suzerain vassal treaty. That's really all I've ever read it as. Especially since it's close to the Hittite suzerain vassal treaties. So it's really all I've read it as, and I just insert God instead of some sort of evil empire, if you will.
So there you go, Adam. There's your challenge before school starts. Go back and read Deuteronomy, but read it like a love letter, and then let me know how it goes. Because when I did it, blew my mind. I was just like, oh my gosh. If you need any kind of assurance that God loves us, like Deuteronomy, it's all about God is love. And it's just, I can nerd out about that all day, because it was a really fun class, and she completely changed everything I understood about Torah, which completely changed. That's why Torah matters, and why understanding Torah matters, and understanding that Christ is Torah redefines everything and how we look at everything. So, it is really amazing. There's some really good stuff in there. So I think we're kind of taking as much time as we can. I could go on about this for a lot longer, but
we could be here all afternoon.
I know we could. Old Testament nerds getting together, that can last for days, but so I do want to touch point on a few places in the actual, where we would call Torah instructions. So in the Mosaic covenant, let's go there and explain it that way, because I think that is going to help clarify for people between the first 5, the Pentateuch, and the Mosaic covenant. So we'll kind of use that language. Maybe that'll kind of help differentiate for people what we're talking about. So in the Mosaic covenant and all of those instructions there, Adam,
Yes,
how in the world are we
present,
seeing Jesus
present.
in that? Like, where is Jesus in all of the
Um,
if that and stuff?
yeah. So Jesus is all throughout the instructions, honestly. And unfortunately, there are some misunderstandings when it comes to these instructions, especially
Mm-hmm.
from the outside coming in. Namely, what I mean by that are the unbelievers. They come up and have these questions, and they should, but at the same time, I think they need the motives are a bit different. But
Yeah.
namely, it's with women in slavery. I
Mm-hmm.
think are two hot topics when it comes to the Old Testament, because the Old Testament was written during under a patriarchal society, especially
Yeah.
in the ancient Near East. So, first of all, hating, let's just start out with that one. Hating women really does not align well with the Old Testament or Jesus and the New Testament for that matter, under Torah. Though again, those looking out, those from the outside looking in will read passages from Deuteronomy 22, for example,
Mm-hmm.
in their eyes, and they'll see that, oh, you see, it supports the idea that a woman must marry her rapist, if you will,
Right.
or supports a shotgun wedding. And it's just really not the case. We could go with Deuteronomy in the same chapter, starting off with the first case. You've got the husband who wants to divorce his wife because of infidelity. And if she's found not guilty, the husband's supposed to be humiliated or chastised, and he's going to pay a fine of 100 shekels of silver, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
really seem like a lot of money, but in the olden days, it was, I think it was the equivalent of a dowry.
Yeah, it
100 shekels
was.
was the equivalent of
Yeah.
a dowry.
Mm-hmm.
So he had to repay the dowry if he was found,
Right.
if his wife was found not guilty. So right there in the first case, you see protection offered for the woman,
Mm-hmm.
rather than providing some sort of danger, rather than
Right.
endangering the woman. You can go right down that list again. I do think it's worth noting that the instructions are not statutory.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a mistake people make, is that this is a cut and dry. The instructions Torah
Right.
is cut and dry rather than interpreting it as common law.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it goes back to those guidelines or instructions for right living. They think they interpret the Old Testament casuistic law, which is the if then clauses that you mentioned earlier. Um, the that it must happen like this. That's sort of how we interpret the
Mm-hmm.
law, and it's
Yeah.
not
Mm-hmm.
how they interpreted the law. So we need to just, I don't know, wad that up and throw it out of our
Right. Right. Because it
mind.
leaves room for grace. Because, like we said before,
Yeah.
that what is stated there is the worst case scenario resolution of the problem. But if you were to take those situations before the priest, he had a whole lot of room for a whole lot of grace to deal with people individually without going to the worst case scenario. So it's, like if, say, I don't know, something like this is one of the, well, I don't, we won't go into that. Never mind. You're going to statutory minimums, but I don't want to get into this whole, turn this into a political litmus test about that
No,
and
it's
all kinds of things. But
um ultimately what I was kind of leading into, because you get that case, and I
Mhm,
know you do Deuteronomy 22, but
mhm,
you get case by cases, and then you get the ones that are involving graping, if you will.
mhm,
Um, and it's all about, but in the end, it's all about restoration as well. We're going to
mhm,
restore the woman. I notice it favors women, though. It's like
mhm.
the screaming in the city, the screaming without the city, and everything. And in each case, the woman's restored or saved, rescued.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. That's one recurring theme in Deuteronomy 22 is rescuing, and then restoration. So, and the same thing when you get to the slave laws,
Mhm,
particularly in Exodus 21. And again, it's another touchy subject, but I've always understood this as redemptive theology, in that
mhm.
God meets the Israelites where they were. I mean, they just came from uh, Egypt, that little Exodus event, not little, but you know what I
Right.
mean.
Right.
You know, It allowed it. Mainly, it was about debt slavery in Torah, but again, we see stipulations and rules protecting the vulnerable, the enslaved.
Hmm.
So we're and even then, the owner is called to love the slave, to care for
Hmm.
the slave, to shelter the slave, provide food, clothing, and shelter for the enslaved. And in some cases, they could even marry. The enslaved person could marry or be given in marriage.
Hmm.
So this highlights the chesed that you mentioned earlier, as far as when it comes to God, who and it's the chesed that the owner should have for his slave. Um, I lost my place. Um, yeah, who may or may not have lost his estate or will lose his estate. It's again,
Hmm.
you start to see this restoration again. It's because the whole slave laws were about restoring the enslaved person back.
Hmm.
That's why the 6 years, and then the seventh year he'll be released, and then you got the year of Jubilee with the remission of debts, so the
Yep.
cancellation of debts, which was a problem in the prophets, if you know.
Right.
So it's this whole idea of restoration, and chesed is littered throughout these instructions
Hmm.
about the enslaved person and women as well. So yeah, and restoring right relationship. That's another theme. So
Right. And I think that that's really important when we're looking forward again at Jesus, because Torah is adamant. The care for the vulnerable, for the widow, the orphan, the foreigner, it's very much like the heart of Torah. Even in the sacrificial system, there are sacrifices that are offerings, because I don't like the word sacrifices. So the word, the offerings,
Lara
there
didn't either.
the offerings, there's one or two of them where the offerer receives the most of the food offering back, and they have to share
Hmm.
that. They have to eat it
Yeah.
communally. Anything left over is to their shame, and that, if you had more than your family could eat, bring in. So the intention was care for the community. I mean, it's baked
Hmm.
and built. Everybody loves to run around with Micah 6:8 on their coffee mug, the whole people's mantra about that. But that was serious. God was like serious about, and that's the prophets, like, yes, there's that nice little one verse quote there that people like to pull out. But what they're actually doing there is Israel is being severely judged because they did not. They exploited the poor. They ignored the widows. They didn't care for the
Hmm.
orphans. They didn't care for the ones that were the most vulnerable. Like God cared about and made sure, and this again makes Israel different from everywhere else in the ancient world, because anyone who was not able to buy the favor of their deity was disposable. But
Yeah.
in Israel, God says, you can't buy my favor. You need to care for the lowly. That is how everyone gets the blessings of the covenant. And it's
Yeah.
very, very specific. And we see that that's a lot of what Jesus. This is where I love my snarky side reading Jesus's interactions with the Pharisees, because he's just like, you know what? You're not even living up to your own words. You are the hypocrites and not caring for those that I told you to care for. And you're just like,
Yeah.
it's that's where they really get in trouble, is they're not doing. It's like, did you not learn this lesson before? I already threw you
Oh my
out
God.
and brought you back in, and you
How
still
many
haven't
times we
learned the
got to
lesson.
how many times we got to teach you, old man?
Right? You just, but they were never fully restored, and we don't see the full restoration until Christ, which
Tell
is a
Jesus.
beautiful thing. And that final coming, which really, so many of us are looking forward to that final eschaton, and that new heaven, new earth. It is anyway. So I don't want to get too
All
sidetracked, because
good.
we're getting too close to eschatology. So we're going to abandon ship right there. So, Which I want to jump in back into the narrative again, because
Yeah.
this really is, and I saw this. Somebody sent me in a group thread that I'm in, sent this image of, and I was going to pull it up and have it ready to show, but I think I'm not going to, because I don't really like to platform a whole lot of nonsense. But
Yeah.
it was a quote by somebody. I'm going to look at it just to make sure I get it in the right place. Okay, so it was talking about the Bible was written by 40 different authors over a period of 1,500 years, yet tells one cohesive story from Genesis to Revelation. Jesus Christ reigns as Lord and Savior. And this was Dustin Benji who said this.
Mm-hmm.
And I just cringe a little bit at that. I think it's a little too overly simplistic.
It is too simplistic. It's not really, it doesn't seem like they have a good view of how the Old Testament was compiled and edited and written and everything. So
Well, and I think
I think I've come across that too.
I think it's really important, and I want to stop and talk about intertextuality and a hermeneutic for just a minute, because one of the things that I see, and I took a really amazing class this summer. It was called the New Testament Use of the Old Testament, and it was intertextuality. And I'm like, I was on the fence about going full boat into intertextuality, and then this class just shoved me off the Grand Canyon edge of that. So that's really where I want to spend the bulk of the rest of my time and work and research and stuff is doing intertextual work, because it's so amazing and fascinating. But I just sidetracked myself. Oh yeah, so I told you it's one of those days. Oh yeah, Greer. Okay, so when you look at this, you would see two approaches to intertextuality and to looking at interpreting scripture. Either somebody starts at the beginning and looks forward, or they start at the end and they look backwards. But you very rarely see someone going both directions, right? So you don't see, there's not a lot of back and forth, and there's a lot that gets skipped in the middle. So there's this really weird thing where you get, the Old Testament, and this is just observation, not criticism or endorsement, just observation. Old Testament folks stay in the Old Testament and then look forward at the Gospels and the New Testament and read it that way. New Testament folks are happy where they're at, and if they look backwards at it, but there's not as much back and forth fluidity between the testaments. And then I think there's some Second Temple literature in there that really needs to be part of the conversation, because I'm okay, and I want to very clearly say this. I'm not saying put the Apocrypha in your canon. You don't have to. But you need to know what's in it, because there is stuff in there and stories that help you understand how we get to the New Testament and the New Testament world and how they're thinking. So if you're ignoring all of that, because I don't even want to repeat the arguments that I get for this, because it annoys me. But these are things that are good to know. Like if you're, so let me think about it this way. If you're a fan of, let's pick something, let's get in trouble with Star Wars, right? And you've got the three main, everybody loves those, the three main first three movies that came out, right? Definitions of Star Wars. And then you get the prequels, and then you get the unfortunate, whatever that was, at the last three of that kind of thing.
7, 8, 9.
Right?
Yeah, 7, 8, 9.
Right. So, but all of those are back, like supplemental material that, if you go back and watch those, then you go watch the original three, and you're just kind of like, oh, well, now that joke makes a little bit more sense now, or oh, that like why they made that choice, that makes a little bit more sense now, because it just kind of gives you perspective and a bigger perspective, and that they fit into the narrative that's going on of God's story. So, I think it's important that we read the stuff the New Testament authors were reading. Yeah, maybe they didn't quote these things verbatim, but being good little Jewish boys, read Maccabees. They were familiar with the story of the Maccabees. They read
Yes.
Tobit. They read Enoch. They read Baruch. They read Sirach. These were part of their education. And so, I think it's important in the narrative because it all helps us point to, you want to talk about incarnation, Baruch. Baruch is going to really hit on that and what is coming in the incarnation. And
Yes, for sure.
but if you've never read Baruch, you're missing some pieces. So, so trust me, if you read those books, you will not spontaneously combust. They are entertaining and good information to inform what your perspective is, understanding the scope of the education and the understanding that the New Testament authors had. So we should at least do that bare minimum there. So
100%. Maccabees in general for me was what cleared a bunch of stuff. I think Roddy beat me to the punch there with his comment about reading Maccabees and making it crystal clear why making everything crystal clear why everything was perfectly set up for Jesus when it did. 100%.
Yeah. So I just, that's why in the narrative conversation, and you get people get stuck on the canon argument, and certain people insist on just 66. Some other people have bigger canons than others. It gets an ugly fight. I think all of those have different I would say different levels of authority, but they all are part of the narrative. So all of it's important because all of it gives us an even fuller picture of Christ that we're waiting for in all of this. And all of those point back to Torah. So, you've got Second Maccabees is quoting Exodus 24 in several cases, in Second Maccabees 2, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's important to pay attention to the entire narrative. So I don't want to beat a dead horse unless you have something else that you want to throw in on that one.
Nah, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. All right. So, and this is my last point that I wanted to really kind of look at and think about. And so we're going to go back to, and I think we've mentioned this before. First of all, we're not going to have allergic reaction to this because some people just don't like the word, but we're going to talk about Christ is part of Torah and is Torah and the author of Torah because it is part of liturgy. It's part of liturgy. And what we mean by that and what we mean by liturgy is a rhythm. It's a cycle, and it is a participatory process. So you get, it starts with first with the Hebrew language. The Hebrew language itself is liturgical. It has a rhythm. It has a cadence. It has cycles. It has this way of understanding things in that participatory way. It's hard to explain to people who don't know Hebrew or I don't want to sound like an elitist or anything, but that was one of the things that kind of helped me. Like when I realized Hebrew is liturgical, it was really interesting. So, and liturgy in church context has, and Roddy's right, a more definition of order of worship. And I think that's where liturgy and Christ starts in Genesis 1, because Genesis 1 is setting up the liturgy of creation. Because you've got rhythm being established, and the creating and the filling, but all of it is God setting up the the worship of creation. And so, liturgy starts in Genesis 1, and we see
Mm-hmm.
it go all the way through. So, and so I'm going to let you like expand, throw in some of your thoughts there while I kind of organize the rest of what I want to say on that one in my head.
Yeah, no problem. No, you're onto something. We usually call Genesis 1:1 through 2:4 a priest text.
Mhm.
So it was read as a liturgy. Um, but that just sets the stage for the rest of the Old Testament in general, as far as Hebrews concerned, in that it's just all a liturgical, it's all a liturgy. I was going to come up with something clever to say, but I'm just going to end it with liturgy with that sentence. So some of it doesn't, for me, if you're reading Hebrew, like you get to the historical narratives and stuff,
Mhm.
particularly Genesis 12 or the Exodus account at the beginning of Exodus, where it describes and it tells the story or account of the Exodus itself. It may not sound liturgical because it's telling an historical narrative, but it is still an historical narrative. They would read this in synagogue as a liturgy. It
Mhm.
wasn't just limited to Psalms, Proverbs, even Lamentations. These were things that were liturgical and they were read as a liturgy uh, all throughout, I was going to say Old Testament times, but um, before Christ came on the scene, it's fully God and fully man. And again, we won't go any further than that. Uh, but that's how it was on a weekly basis with synagogue. And you see a bit of that in the New Testament too,
Mhm.
because they were still under Torah and how it was a liturgy to them as well. So,
Right. And I think that because of modern worship context and the modern worship wars that are kind of going on right now, that you've
mhm,
got certain traditions have a very defined order and liturgy to them. I'm thinking more like high liturgical churches, like the Orthodox, the Catholics, high church
yo,
Anglicans, like those kinds of things, right? Those have very prescript
yeah,
orders for things. And then you've got some of the other side of the pendulum where it's, not that. I want to be careful
yeah,
here because I'm not as much of a fan of that. I just anyway. I don't want to. But so if you're and by order of worship, your understanding of what order of worship means is going to be affecting how we read back into the way that would have been done at the temple,
yeah,
the tabernacle. So it's not as much the worship band and then the priest gets up and reads a few verses and then talks for 45 minutes about what that means. you know their understanding of how they did liturgy was a lot of they would have the psalms, they would have interwoven with the story of God. So
hmm
they're going to be bringing in and reading Genesis and Exodus, and they're going to be bringing in and reading whatever they have available to them of the stories of their histories. And a lot of that, Adam, actually, interestingly, most of that is all going to be orally done, and it's going to be memorized, and it's going to be repeated, because especially when we get back from well we get to go to exile and return from the diaspora, you know they didn't have the temple for a long time. And
yeah,
so that's where synagogues came from. And most synagogues, by the time you get to the time of the Gospels, a lot of synagogues couldn't afford a scroll, let alone the entire collection of all of the
yeah,
Old Testament scrolls. And so the importance of oral memory. And, a lot of us now, like some of us with ADHD, we remember things for about 7.6 minutes and then it's gone. And if we don't write it down, like forget it, don't understand how you can memorize entire books and
Yeah.
be able to recite stories of the entire Old Testament. And just to be able to, like, if I could do one time traveling experience, I would want to go back and sit and listen as a storyteller in this liturgy process retold the history of Israel, because that would be an amazing experience to sit and listen, because that's what we're talking about. It is this use of story and song and to tell their history and to remind them and to be in relationship and worship of God, because this is who we are and this is what God has done for us, and we're celebrating that. And and that is the story of pointing us to Christ. So you've got all the types and archetypes that are being laid out, all of the, this understanding of prepping for the one that we're as our anticipation, the one that's our hope. And we're also seeing here, I think, as Israel continues to fail to live up to their side of the covenant, and God keeps stepping in and setting them right and trying again over and over and over. And humans are slow, and they just never quite got there. And one of, not the only, but one of the things I think we get to in the incarnation is God's like, okay, I've tried to work with you. I gave you Torah. I gave you, this, I gave you this love. I gave you protection. I gave you prophets. I gave you correction. And you're still not getting it. You're still not getting the hesed of God. So I'm going to come down and show you. If you're not getting me explaining it to you, I'm going to come live it for you. I'm going to show you how to live it. And that, I think, is the embodiment of Torah, because he shows us the love, the hesed of God. And that's the book of John, again. And Matthew, the book of Matthew, really hits into, I think, talking about how, Jesus really leans into the law and the prophets and talking about the Old Testament and, making claims about this is what it says, but I say this. And I would make the argument that he does that because he wrote Torah in the first place. And so the author of Torah is saying, no, you got that wrong. That's not how that was supposed to, it's not a legal thing, a checklist that you did or didn't do. It's a heart issue, and it's supposed to change your heart. And so Jesus is saying, you missed the point that I tried to give you before. So now I'm coming down to show you this is a heart issue.
Let me restate again and let me know where you where you went off.
Right. Exactly. Jesus is saying when he is saying, I know, and people will talk about this, like he'll say, I say don't murder, but I say if you're angry at your brother, or some of those things that he does. Like, oh, he's upping the ante on Torah. Well, yes.
Yes and no.
But yes and no. Like the surface level reading, yes, that's what he's doing. But what he's doing is he's going after the fact that this is supposed to change your heart. Not, change starts in the heart and goes outward from there. And that's what Torah was meant to do. It was meant to reconnect them to the heart of God. And they missed it. So he came down in the incarnation, and part of the incarnation, I will show you tangibly in a way you can't miss my hesed love for everyone. Not certain people, not some predetermined list, not, everyone has a chance at the hesed of God, because Christ came and showed it to everyone.
100%.
So that is, I think, why, because liturgy is meant to be lived. It's not just, whatever period of time you sit on your Sunday morning in your church, worshiping together in your faith family. Liturgy is meant to be a rhythm of life. And that's what Torah was. And that's what Christ shows us in the incarnation, because he's the author of all of it in the first place. And I think we get there in Exodus when they're at the Mount Sinai and Moses is given the instructions. But it's also very clear all over in Torah. God says, you cannot see my face and live. So Christophany, Christ shows up. Author of Torah, gives Torah to Moses. Says, here you go. Get people to, get this going. And then he has to come back in the Gospels and say, you missed the point.
You missed it. Yeah.
It's a heart issue, and it's a liturgy is supposed to make it ingrained into a holistic life. That's what liturgy does. And that's why I think Jesus is Torah, because that is the life liturgy and heart change that has to go out to everyone around us, because that is what is going to draw people to Christ, is our liturgically living out, trying to become that hesed that he showed to all of us.
Yeah.
So
100%.
I think we tried to sufficiently not make people mad by
Right. I'd say it was successful. Cleared up some misunderstandings, at least on my part, with my short. So one of the things I absolutely love, you were on the spot talking about right living and how Jesus was the one who showed us how to live out Torah on a daily basis, and liturgy is that rhythm that we're supposed to live, or at least, yeah. So one of the things I absolutely love is the invitation, going all the way back to Genesis, the invitation to participate in his creation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he does with Adam and Eve, is he invites Adam and Eve to participate in his creation, especially in sacred space. Now, we obviously messed it up. Adam and Eve messed it up, and then they were cast out of sacred space into profane space. But it's always, even after we were cast out of sacred space, we were called to participate in his creation. And one of the coolest things is when that translates into the New Testament is that when Jesus commands us in Matthew 28 to expand his kingdom, we are called to participate again, not only in creation, but also in expanding his kingdom outwards.
Mm-hmm.
So you see that played out not only in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament as well. So that was one of the coolest things when that, when you said your mind was blown from the love letter in Deuteronomy,
Right.
that's what blew my mind. I read, I was reading, which book was it? Over the summer, you get to read books you want to read,
Right.
as reading all these other books you're forced to read. Well, they're cool and read, and you just want to get through because you have like 4 books a class. So over the summer, one of the books that really spoke to me on this was this participation in creation was Relaire's book, which I've hinted at, I think, in this video. And then the explanation of Old Testament violence. And one of the nuggets in there was that we were called to be gardeners, which highlights that participation, that participatory role that we have in creation and in expanding the kingdom of God in the New Testament. So,
right, which
work and keep the garden, which basically means to take care of creation and work it.
Right, which
so
I really want a rabbit trail on that one, because we talked about this before we started, which I think I'm going to go ahead and bring it in, because I do think also that it is relevant, because as we were talking about, there's okay, I'm trying to think about how to word this, because I don't want to, again, unnecessarily upset people. But I think there's some people reading, or hermeneutic, the way that we read the Bible, that read the Genesis narrative, that read the creation narrative in Genesis 1. And I think that gets read sometimes as, here was the establishment of perfection that was lost, and then we're waiting to be restored to that. And like
Hmm.
you and I were kind of talking about, there's some things that are going on narratively and some things going on in the Hebrew where I don't think that uh, in the pattern holds up. So I think now, not saying, so let's quickly unpack that really, a little bit. So
Yeah.
I say that for a couple of reasons. One, because the Hebrew itself, when it talks about Eden and it talks about each day of creation is good, is tov. And then the
Yeah.
last day, the day 6, and man and, the animals and man, and the whole thing is filled. He says tov tov, which is
Yeah.
doubling down on good, but it's not the same word for perfect because that's its own
Correct.
word. So God doesn't declare it perfect. He calls it extra good, which
Hmm.
is still, I would argue, but I'm not a Hebrew expert. So I'm not going to, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but leaves room for maturation. It's going to mature into
Yeah.
perfect. And I think that another part of the way I get there is, like, as we were talking about the tree, people call it the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But I
Hmm.
think that I like to go back and just refer to it as the tree of Tov and Ra. And the really interesting thing about this idea, because the word Ra in Hebrew has such a huge semantic range, and
Yeah.
there is some aspects to the use of Ra that have a, I'm trying to figure out how to say this, have a morally corrupt nature to that. So it is evil because it's morally corrupt and can only have bad outcomes, malicious intents. It is the intentional infliction of harm and suffering, and it's just what we think of as evil. But there's also another aspect to Ra that doesn't contain that moral corruption. Sometimes it's just really bad, sucky outcomes, things that happen that are not, So like one of my Hebrew professors explained it kind of this way. So a lion that eats a gazelle, right,
Hmm.
is in the Bible, that's spoken of as Ra. But
Hmm.
it's not, the lion's not a serial killer that's going out and murdering for fun. He needs to eat, and that
Yeah.
outcome really sucks for the gazelle because that's not a good outcome for him. But it is just, so, but it's not, but that is Ra. But and going back, and so thinking about this, and I think the ancient Near East mind is going to look at that more as Tov and Ra, as the choice of things that lead to life and the choice of things that lead to death, is the divergent paths that those take. And because that tree is in Eden, without those two coming to maturity into being held in balance, in perfect balance, that I see a little bit of a conflict of that being in a perfected Eden without the tree and Adam and Eve being able to be mature enough to take that fruit and eat it and hold those things in balanced tension the way they were supposed to be, is kind of how I get to where I get to with, it was very good, double down good, but not yet perfect, because the whole thing needed to mature into full relationship with God. And they weren't
Hmm.
there yet. And we got this, you know, the serpent, however you want to look at that, is there, and we get off track, and that's how we end up out of Eden. But I think in the final thing, again, going back to, this is why Ezekiel is my favorite book in the Bible, 36 and 37, because the corrupt
Yeah.
has to die and is reborn
Yeah.
in the spirit into full perfection. And I think that's going to be the new heaven, new earth that we see in Revelation, is that full perfection in that gathering space that was created for us to dwell with Yahweh. So I don't know. I'd love to hear some more. I mean, we talked about it a little bit, but any thoughts you have on
No,
on
I
my
think I think
blasphemy
that was
there?
spot on with what Tove and Ra are. I think Blake in the chat said it pretty good too. Tov means good and the Ra means not good.
Yeah.
Um, More or less. I also use as an example of fruits can spoil, and usually when fruits can spoil, that would be raw.
Yeah.
So there's nothing really evil about that. Fruits will rot because or spoil because that's just how it is now. So yeah, no, I you said it. So
Okay. So, but I think that that also comes into Christ because that's how we get, mature, get into the maturity of the perfection that's the new heaven, new earth, and which is a whole nother fun conversation about how Genesis in the Genesis 1 language, God separates, and then Revelation and the new heaven, new earth reintegrates that which was separated in Genesis. We see it come back together uh, in
yeah.
perfection in Revelation. So that's kind of how I get there. But that's all brought into full fruition. I can't say that
Mhm.
word very well in Christ, and that is the fulfillment that we're still the already not yet that we're still waiting for. So, all right.
Woo.
Jesus is Torah. Jesus is Torah
He is.
because Jesus is life. Jesus is love of God. Jesus is the relationship that brings us back into community with God and with each other the way we were created to be in the first place. So, is Jesus in Torah? Yes. Is Jesus Torah? Yes. Did Jesus write Torah? Yes.
All the
Absolutely.
above.
Most definitely all of the above. So, but we have to have that in proper context and not get crazy with too much. We don't want to
Yeah.
overplay our hand on that either, because
Yeah.
some groups will get into, and I spent a lot of my growing up years in a tradition where you kind of mentally put Jesus every other word when you're reading the Old Testament. And it was just like,
Mhm.
can we let we let these stories be their own stories?
Yeah, you
Because
gotta let him be.
they're like the color on the picture of Christ. Like they just kind of really help. They stand on their own, but they also point to Christ. It's not, I think so. We don't want to get overly crazy with reading every other word in the Old Testament as Jesus, because then you're going to miss a whole lot of the beauty of the Old Testament, it being its own story. But it really is one. So this is where I would grudgingly agree with that quote that I read earlier, because it is one.
Oh yeah.
It is one story, garden to garden. How do we get back into relationship with God? Jesus, Sunday school answer, but it's so much more beautiful and complex than that. And so anyway, I don't want to belabor the point because everybody's got Saturdays and things. So Adam,
Yeah.
what are we taking away from Torah? Jesus is Torah. He wrote Torah. Like, why should we care about any of this?
Um, I think we all know what to do is that we should be living it out. In light of the resurrection, for starters. Um, yeah, we should really, yeah. I think that sums it up, really. I think we should just be living it out going forward, living out that chesed life, and yeah,
Because I think that speaks even more loudly than anything else.
yeah.
I
So go
can
do likewise.
right, and that's one of the things I love that Jesus says: "Go do likewise." Don't go. Like it's not the primary thing. Is there's a lot of preaching involved, but a
Yeah.
lot of the commands are more go do likewise, go do likewise, go do likewise, go heal the sick, go do this, go do that, live in a way that, and I think really, I don't want to open another can of worms here, but that's one of the things that the early church really did very well. And, there's I'm just going to throw the bomb, and people can not like it if they want, which is the Didache is the liturgy of the early church, and it's the the instructions, and there's a lot of things in there that clarify, this is kind of how things are done, but a lot of it is organizing that which they were already doing in Christ. And so the intertextuality of the Didache is amazing. It's not that long. It'll take you 20 minutes to read. Very, very simple. If you are pro-life, you're going to love the Didache because it's very clear. Abortion is prohibited. Like, it's flat out right in there. So read the Didache. It's really amazing. But it's all about living it out. It's that thing Christ did. You didn't get the heart change, so I'm going to come show you the heart change. That's the importance of the whole thing in Jesus and Torah. So, Adam,
Yeah,
we have come to the end of,
we have.
of Torah. I mean, this. I'm going to thank you so much for this because I had a blast.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This was insane. This was crazy good. I loved every minute of it, honestly. The prepping and then actually carrying it out. Yeah.
Yeah, we've had a good time. So we will definitely have to get together and do something else.
Yes.
Doing some more Old Testament
Sure.
nerding out on some on some things,
For
and
sure.
I think you and I both have tried to make this as approachable as possible, and to really
Yeah.
just stick to the plain application stuff and not get bogged down in, well, this theology says this and this theology says that, like this. We try to anchor more in just the scholarship and the original languages and the narrative, and just try to stay in that, because I think that brings us back around to the universal message, and not overlaying
Well,
things that don't
keep,
necessarily
keep hitting my
belong
laptop and then
there,
it
right?
moves the camera.
So yeah, I would definitely say, we have tried to be impartial in that way,
Yes.
and tried to explain things as much as we could that way. But again, Adam, thank you so much. I've had
Yeah.
a blast. We have really, I think, done a lot of really fun things, and uh, also managed to cover some controversial things, and we didn't get in a lot of trouble for it either. So
Yeah,
I got
for sure. Yes.
some
Success.
complaints, but yes, when you don't get, other people pulling you up and doing reaction videos, I think we've done well because we avoided
Yeah.
that so far. So, but all right, thank you everybody for joining us. This is, again, like I said, our last Torah series video.
Yep.
And after you finish drinking there, so what is coming out? What have you got planned over
Oh,
there on
um,
Linguisamo?
I will actually, I've started writing a script on the archaeological site of Ethel, which is
Mhm.
the biblical eye. Well, we
Right.
think it's the biblical eye. I'm trying to write a script on that. And hopefully in the coming weeks, I want to bring up those 20-minute. I used to do 20-minute videos and release them every Monday.
Hmm.
I kind of want to get back to that. Starting with this video on I coming up, I still got to finish the script. Like I said, my channel usually focuses on the historical and archaeological
Hmm.
aspects of it, of the Old Testament. And I usually try to tie that into some sort of theology, like, because what happened historically, sometimes the writers theologized it. Um, so I usually try to incorporate that into it. But in the coming weeks, my goal is to start creating those videos, those weekly videos again, and hopefully start going live again. I think the last time I had difficulties because I had reverb issues
Hmm.
here. This room isn't really conducive for audio, even if you have a great mic. So that's what I've got coming. Immediately, it's going to be and then I'll still create the weekly shorts as well, but and try to clarify as much as possible. Because apparently, I don't clarify a lot. do well on the clarification in my shorts.
It's just really hard to do that though, and
It's
because
in a
a
minute.
lot of this stuff needs space and time to explain. It's very hard to condense the ancient Near East mind and Hebrew and all that stuff into a 30 to
A
60
1
second
minute.
short. Like, yeah, you
Yeah.
get a minute and you're like, I got 27 minutes of things to explain in a minute. Like, yeah, it's very, very difficult. So, well, I'm really excited about that because I don't watch a lot of YouTube, funnily enough,
Yeah.
but yours are some of the ones that I usually watch because I always learn something interesting about the ancient Near East world and the languages and that kind of stuff. So I appreciate your when your material comes out, I always appreciate it, and I do recommend your channel occasionally when people ask me questions I don't know about, especially the other cultures around Israel. I will send them to you
Oh yeah.
because you're better at that, more informed at that than I am because I just haven't. That's not been my focus of study, and that's been more your focus of study. So,
Yeah.
so on my channel, so wow, I've got some stuff coming out. So next week I've got a good friend, Jalen Thompson from Faith Unaltered Cosmic Corner,
Mhm.
is coming, and we're going to talk about why it's important to be connected. Especially, there was some back and forth exchanges on Facebook the other day. Somebody put up a controversial thing about if you're on YouTube, you should be and connected to a church and submitted to your pastor, and they should know what you're doing. And some people thought that was ridiculous. So
Yeah.
Jalen's going to come, and we're going to come talk about that and
Yeah, that
the
is
importance
ridiculous.
of being connected to community. I've got a video coming out September 8th on Old Testament wrath and wrath of God and what that actually is. So we're going to kind of dig into and
That's pretty fun.
change some people's minds about that, I think. I've got the next of the Leviticus, why Leviticus matters, is coming towards the end of September. So I'm really excited about that too. We're going to dig into holiness and the priesthood. Um, and the gang is getting back together for that. So that's going to be fun. And then I've got the Cosmic Corner folks. So Garrett Skydema, Joshua Davidson, and then Joshua Sherman, I think, is joining us. And we are going to talk about the narrative, about the narrative nature of Scripture. But we're going to start from Genesis 1 and the first couple words of the Bible there, because Rashit usually can mean beginning, and we always translate it beginning, but you can go back to the root, and there can be an argument made that could be conceptually explained as from the imagination of God. The story starts. So we're going to talk about that aspect, and God as the divine storyteller, and creation coming from the imagination of God. So that's going to be fantastic. I am really excited about that one. And then we'll see. I've got a few more things cooking. I want to do a look at tracing liturgy through the Scripture. So I've got a few people that are going to be coming and doing some guest appearances for that. And we dig into that some more and what is liturgy and how Scripture is liturgical, because it's a fun topic to get into. And then it's going to depend on what I'm researching at the moment for my thesis, because that tends to turn into a lot of my content. It's like I'm already researching this for school, so I'll just,
Right?
I'll just turn it into a video.
Your papers just become videos. Yeah.
That's right. That's exactly how that works. That's the secret for seminary students who are on YouTube. That's where your content comes
Yep.
from. Like, I just wrote a paper on this. I'm going to do a video because all the research
Do a
is already
video.
done. Exactly. That's how it works. All right, everybody.
It's honest work.
It is. And it's practical application, which they're always telling us
Not
we
much.
need to do. So,
Not much, but
all
it's
right. Thanks again, Adam. I look forward to
Yep.
having you back at some point. We will have some more fun,
Yes.
Get into some trouble, some more on some other topics. And everybody else, thank you for tuning in. This has been a great series. And drop down in the comments, like I'm always open to suggestions. If there's stuff that you really want to engage with and material that you want to learn about, drop it in the comments, or you can, on my channel, there's a link to my email. Send me an email. Let me know, because I don't, anything Old Testament or New Textuality, I'm game for. But if I don't know people want to see a video on it, I can't make it. So I will everybody get back to your day. That was a really fun hour and a half. So and around here, we really like to focus on the journey to dwell with God, and every day, just trying to move a step closer in that journey. So go and be blessed.